glad Steve, please like and subscribe. Please click on the Deck Heroes icon. Click and subscribe. It's 100% free. Blood in, blood out. And don't forget to click on the notifications just so you don't miss any amazing content. If you look to the right, we're looking at the plan of the 6-time bankrupt Donald Trump with the economy. Obviously, there's going to be lots of fiscal responsibility. We will see.
We're taking a closer look at President Trump's joint address to Congress. Steve Ratner is back with more fact checks. There are a lot, Steve. First up, President Trump doubled down on one of his biggest campaign promises, which is making his 2017 tax cuts permanent. Watch.
We're seeking permanent income tax cuts all across the board. And to get urgently needed relief to Americans hit especially hard by inflation, I'm calling for no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, and no tax on Social Security benefits for our great seniors. And I also want to make interest payments on car loans tax deductible, but only if the car is made in America.
Okay. So, Steve, you say that's impossible to do with the House Republicans' budget proposal.
Yeah, look, Trump hands out
Just very quickly, so he's going to break down. You've heard the commitments from Trump's mouth himself, and now we're going to break down the cost of each element, and also he's going to go into what the actual budget is. 4.5 trillion. We'll see how that works out.
cuts like they were Halloween candy, but then at some point, you got to deal with the reality of what that all adds up to. So let's take a look at the reality. The chickens are coming home to roost on that. So he's talking about no tax on Social Security, no tax on overtime, no tax on tips, no tax on interest loans on cars made here. These are billions and billions of dollars of tax cuts. Simply extending his existing tax cuts, the ones that he passed in 2017, down here, would cost over $4 trillion. The House Budget Committee has only allocated...
Let's not just skip over that. So the existing tax cuts are this element here in red. It's just over $4 trillion. And he's just said that the total budget is $4.5 trillion. So if you look at the next one, no tax on Social Security, obviously we're looking at approximates. It's going to be about just over another $1 trillion. No tax on overtime, looks like just under $1 trillion. Zero interest on loans for cars which are built in the US, that looks like $100 billion. 15% corporate tax from domestic industry, that looks around $500 billion. So he's got $4.5 trillion, 4,500 billion in total. This 6-time bankrupt man is going to blow through that budget, which means more debt on America for now and generations. One of his promises was to remove government debt, and he's obviously got absolutely zero intention of doing that. Just an outright lie. How can he get the figures this wrong? Let's go.
$4.5 trillion for all the tax cuts. So you could do this, which he's completely committed to, but how the rest of this happens, including a full deduction of the state and local taxes, it is impossible. This is almost $8 trillion worth of tax cuts. So this is an empty promise. Can't happen, won't happen.
And one of the things that drew, well, let's say shock, surprise, some mockery from the address the other night was President Trump, given what you've laid out there, promising to balance the budget. Here's that moment from the address.
And in the near future, I want to do what has not been done in 24 years, balance the federal budget. We're going to balance it.
Let's look at that again. So he's got 4,500 billion to spend in terms of the budget from the House. And just these existing tax cuts alone are just over 4 trillion. And when you add on everything else, it can't possibly work. It can't possibly work. So he has to be lying, or just incredibly naive. But it has to be a lie, because he would have access to all the information. So what's he talking about? And if you can't rely on anything that he says, then we have to accept it. We can't ignore facts, right?
Steve, how does he plan to do that?
Well, first of all, in his first term, he planned not only to balance the budget, but to pay off all the national debt. That didn't work so well. He added a ton of national debt. But let's look at how it isn't going to work this time. So we are looking in what we call a base case without anything else happening. We are looking at deficits a bit below 2 trillion, going all the way up to 3 trillion over the next 10 years. A total already, these dark green bars, of $20 trillion of additional debt. The budget plan that I just described would add another roughly $2.5 trillion of debt. So instead of balancing the budget and paying down the debt, he's creating more deficits, all these deficits, and adding $22.5 trillion to the debt.
All right, so President Trump addressed tariffs the other day and said they would be positive for the auto industry.
Deals are being made. Never seen. That's a combination of the election win and tariffs. It's a beautiful word, isn't it? That, along with our other policies, will allow our auto industry to absolutely boom. It's going to boom. Spoke to the majors today, all three, the top people, and they're so excited.
Tariffs, he deems a beautiful word. At other times, he said it's his favorite word. And Steve, but we also know yesterday he's already backed off some of the tariffs for the auto industry. What do your charts say?
Well, he may think it's a beautiful word. He may think the auto industry is going to boom. Neither the auto companies nor the stock market see it that way. So here's a chart of stock prices for Ford and General Motors since the inauguration day compared to the overall market. The overall market, we know, has come down, still up here. Ford and General Motors kind of went off a cliff after inauguration, down 10% for General Motors, about 7.5% for Ford. And here's a quote from the Ford CEO before yesterday: tariffs will blow a hole in the industry that we have never seen. And so he said in his speech just now that he had spoken to all three automakers and they were happy. Well, a day later, they called the White House and said, no, we're really not so happy. We need you to...
Let's just pause that, okay, because he didn't really say. So the blue, the blue squiggle is the share price of General Motors, and the red squiggle is the share price of Ford. So we've got election day. Okay, so you can clearly see election day towards the middle, and he actually went up, particularly the blue of General Motors. Then he did. But then it just went down and down and down. So it's gone up to something near 115, down to 85 on the index. And Ford's not very far either. I mean, not so much, Donald, sorry, not so much. And it's easy to talk about, but it's the actual economy and the American people who will suffer, who are suffering. And this is just the start. This is just 6 weeks in. Oh dear.
Pause these tariffs and hopefully get rid of them.
So Trump also touched on exports. So let's keep going with this. President Trump also the other night slammed U.S. aid to Ukraine during his address to Congress.
We've spent perhaps $350 billion, like taking candy from a baby. That's what happened. And they've spent $100 billion. What a difference that is.
Before we get to your charts, we should note, of course, the next day, the Trump administration paused intel sharing with Ukraine. And what's happened since? Russia has only increased its bombardment of Ukrainian cities. Now, Ukraine tries to defend itself with less information. But, Steve, turning back to what the president said the other night, talk to us there about your chart.
This is one of the most weird and surprising ones, Jonathan. He's used those figures over and over and over again. He's been corrected by me and 100 other people over and over and over again, and he still keeps using it. So we'll try one more time. Maybe he's watching. Maybe someone will finally get him to say what is actually true. He claims $350 billion spent by the U.S. in Ukraine. The real number, $120 billion, and as you say, pause.
Let's just let that sink in. Let's let that sink in. How many times has he said... and I've got videos, you can look at the White House video yourself if you want to hear it from his own source or whatever, you're not quite believing it, but he just said it a minute ago. Look at many videos where he quotes 350 billion. This says it's 120 billion. So why is he lying? You've got to ask yourself the question, and if he's just a bullshitter, you got to take it for what it is, and then you got to second guess every other word that he's saying, and that is where you're at. And if that's not enough to put the alarm bells on, then, you know, can't help you. Can't help you. But the other thing to note, it's got the European spend on there as well, 138 billion, which, you know, is more than the US is spending. Just for clarity, for the sake of facts. Anyway, let's go forward.
And just to make a mention, the reason this line isn't as continuous as this line is because of huge fights in the U.S. over aid to Ukraine, a lot of opposition. Eventually, we did do it. Europe, $138 billion, more than us, not $100 billion as he claimed. And by the way, Europe at the moment is putting together a massive amount of additional aid. And as you just alluded to, we are cutting back on what we are doing for the Ukrainians.
And lastly, President Trump touted Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency during his address. Here's what Trump claimed.
We found hundreds of billions of dollars of fraud.
All right, Steve, has Doge found anywhere near as much fraud as Trump claims?
Well, it was kind of mind-numbing the other night to listen to Trump list those programs one by one that he's found, and you make fun of them and so forth. They were only in the millions of dollars. And when you actually add up everything Doge has claimed, and also the Doge reality, you get to a very different picture. So on February 17th, Doge claimed that they had found $8.5 billion, not hundreds of billions, $8.5 billion of savings. I'm not going to go through this whole chart, but basically a bunch of that stuff just disappeared from their website, $2.7 billion here, for example. And when you get down to the bottom, at the moment anyway, all DOGE is claiming is $2.3 billion from contracts that have been terminated and another $2.5 billion that they...
Right, and let's clarify, it's what they are claiming. This is not verified. It's the people that are doing it, verify themselves or just going by their own figures. We know that there's no scrutiny on what Musk is doing in his Doge team of kids and sycophant kids. Just let loose on the vital infrastructure of America is amazing.
They're in the middle of doing, and so $4.8 billion of total fraud, so-called fraud or contracts canceled, so forth, less than what they said at the beginning, and obviously just like the tiniest little fraction of what Trump claims they have found.
Just a great fact check, point by point, from Morning Joe economic analyst Steve Ratner. Steve, thanks so much as always.
Please like, subscribe, and I'm out.